All right, so I'm going to go over the code that I submitted on the GIST so that way we're both on the same page. Now, there is something to be aware of here, which is that programming has a ton of stuff to learn. And there's new stuff coming out all the time. A lot of it you're not going to get on your first pass through. A lot of it is going to be kind of learning through osmosis. You're going to be exposed to something over and over and over again. And eventually by manipulating it, by playing with it, you eventually come to an understanding of what it is. And with Ruby in particular, one of the either good things or bad things, depending upon how you want to look at it, is that Ruby is a very flexible language. It has 100 different ways to do the exact same thing. This is true of most programming languages, but Ruby tends to really shine when it comes to allowing you to choose what methods you want to use or how you want to write your code. The downside being that you can get exposed to the same thing 20 different ways. So we're going to take a look at that. Now, first thing to notice is that I'm using a product called RubyMine. This is a Jetbrains IDE. Jetbrains creates all sorts of great IDEs. You can see that it has free licenses for students, and you can apply for it. And that'll give you a bit of a heads up. In this case, you want RubyMine. And I think they'll give you access to all the products at once, which is really nice. So that's one thing you can do to make your life as a programmer really easy. And just kind of to show you what does an IDE do. Well, for example, right here, I typed r dot. So it's smart enough to know array. R is an array because of this statement right here. And then it lets me go through and see what are all the different methods that are available to me on the array. So I can do r delete. And then I can click to it and I can even get a definition of what it is that it does. Array delete, give it an object or an item, and it deletes all the items that are equal to that object. So stuff like that, whenever you're first starting out, is very useful. Apply for the free license. It will probably help you out a lot when it comes to programming, just because it's just so convenient. Visual Studio Code is a free text editor. It does have plugins that can kind of help, but it's just not nearly as robust. It also has a couple other fun things in it too, so you can right-click and just click Run and run things very easily. You can get an extension for Visual Studio Code called Code Runner that does the same thing. But yeah, it's just a lot nicer to have an IDE, right? And so right there, you need to throw it in an object. So I didn't throw in an object, so it just gave me an error. It says at line 3 right there. There is an error there, wrong number arguments. So I'm going to fix that, save it, and run it again right there. And now we can see that it runs just fine. So let's go over the unique file. Again, don't get too focused on like tools and tricks. Focus more on the core concepts. But it is an important thing to know what sort of tools are out there and how they can help you. So going through this line by line, the first thing that we have here is a require statement. Require tells it that we want to run unit test. And this is something that is baked into Ruby by default. There are other testing frameworks and libraries. You're going to be exposed to them later on in the course, but this is the default one, and it's a pretty good default. So I'm using that so that way there's no extra setup required. The next thing that we're going to do is we're going to define a method. To define a method, you first use the def keyword, which says this is going to be a definition. And then you use in to state where the definition ends. Ruby by default will return a statement, the last statement executed. So anytime there's a last statement like r.unique, it means return this. So sort of the first things up are what are our arrays? Arrays are sort of like folders. You can put whatever it is you want inside of them. You can even put other arrays or objects inside of them. It doesn't matter. So this is one way to declare an array. You just give it a variable name, which I'm calling r so I know what it is, and set it equal to a pair of square brackets. I'll delete that because that's kind of nonsensical. The next thing is Ruby's flexibility. And we can see that because there are sort of multiple ways to add items into an array in Ruby. And this operator right here is one way that says take the string bar and append it to the array. This says the exact same thing. And if I p that out right there and run this file, we can see it right there. Bar and bat appear. Now another way you can create an array, which is what I do inside of the unique method right here, is you can use %w. This is equivalent to this statement right here. And bands, these are both equivocal statements. P new r, comma, new r2. These both do the exact same thing, but it's just a lot easier to not have to worry about using quotation marks around things and using commas. It's a lot easier just to have this space-separated list of items. So this is something you're going to commonly see. It's just a bit of what's known as syntactic sugar, just a way to make it a little bit easier to write code. And I'm going to comment out that, just do p new r. Of course, you should know exactly what I'm going to get here. I'm going to get foo, bar, baz, bats, bands right there. And so I do. As you saw before, the other way you can do it is you can initialize an array with objects, and then you can use the .push method, which will then append to it. Push returns the array back to itself, so you can also do something known as method chaining. You're going to see this a lot in code, and that's where you just call the next item, the next manipulation you want to do to the array. So it's going to add foo to the 1 and 2, and then it's going to add bama, and then it's going to add bam. So you can either do it like this, just use other r.push, new item, or you can use it as the chain where you just keep calling dot whatever off of it. You're going to see both ways. For beginners, writing it in the more long form version like this is usually easier and less prone to error, but you can use either one if you like this shorter syntax. Some people really do like it, some people don't. So if I run that, we can see that right there. Now, all arrays have certain methods on them. One of them is the @, so I can say what is at position 0. Arrays in Ruby start at position 0, not at position 1. There's a very common error called off by 1, which is where you're 1 wrong on your list. So if I say what is at position 0 in the R, which is up here, that should be bar. And sure enough, it is. So right there, and that is at position 0. Then we create a non-unique array using sort of the shorthand syntax that we have right here. So we have duplicate 1, 1, and 1. So calling the method to remove unique values directly off the array, there is .unique. This version does not have an exclamation point. If we run this, so we print out the non-unique r.unique, what happens is it strips out all the duplicate values. So we only have 1, 2, and 3. However, if we then go forward, and let's just remove a little bit of clutter here. I'm going to comment out all this stuff, run it again. There we go. So if we do that, we get 1, 2, and 3. But if we run non-unique R again, we see that it did not modify the values. That is to say, it was a non-destructive operation. The opposite of a non-destructive operation is, of course, a destructive operation. In Ruby, anytime you see this this exclamation point, that means you're performing a destructive operation. That means whatever you're about to do is going to manipulate the original variable. Usually inside of Ruby, what you would do is you would create another variable, and then you would say non-unique r.unique off that. And then this would be what you reference whenever you want to use it. But if you do just want to have a instantaneous change in place, you can use the pound sign like that, or excuse me, pound sign, the exclamation point like that, and then whenever you run that, it is now permanently modified. So that is everything there is to know about array.unique and also creating new arrays. Now, if you have an array, you have the each method on it. The each method is going to run through every single item inside the array, and then you're going to give a name to whatever's in there. It can be anything you want. In this case, we're just going to call it item. I think that's a good name. And we can just print out the items. Let's go ahead and start commenting out some of this stuff, so that way we don't get too much clutter in our code. And let's run that. And, oh, silly me. I need to actually have the non-unique array before I can do anything with it. And I'm going to modify it in place. And one thing, this is a good teaching moment, is don't get too scared by these error messages. The error messages are there to help you. If you read them, they usually tell you exactly what is wrong with it. So it's telling me right there on line 38, you have a variable or a method called non-unique R, and it doesn't know what this is. It's undefined, which means I didn't declare it because I commented it out. Now if I run that again, we get 1, 2, and 3. So it ran through the loop each time, for each item. So now the next thing that's in the code is that we get into the new r.include. So the new r, or the unique array.include method, has a question mark on it, which means it returns true or false. This is another Ruby idiom that's really nice. This lets you know what sort of check you're doing, and this is a true or false one. And so what it's basically asking is, does the value 1 exist inside of the non-unique r? And if it does, then we're going to print out non-unique underscore r includes 1. If it doesn't, we use the else block, and that says, if this isn't true, then do this. And we say non-unique r does not include 1. And of course, it does include 1. The opposite of the if statement is the unless statement. Unless is actually the same as, another way of doing it is you could say if not non-unique r. Do that. That's another way of doing it, but this is generally kind of discouraged. You can see here that the IntelliJ IDE is telling me that this is not how Ruby people usually do things. You'll sometimes hear this referred to as Ruby idioms. And if you hear a term like that, or you'll hear Python idioms, that basically just means the community way of writing code. How does the community prefer to write their code? So the unless statement is an if not statement. So if it doesn't include 1, then perform this operation, which put there is no 1 element. If there is a 1 inside of there, then say there is a 1 element. And we'll prove that with non-unique r.include, and we'll include, oh my. In non-unique r. Run that, and you can see it turns out there is no oh my variable, and we can see that it hit this line here inside the unless block. So whenever we hit this, now that we know how all that works, let's look at the unique array self. We create ourselves a new empty array. Then we take the array that we passed into the method, so whatever we call this with, we run through each element inside of there. And if the new array doesn't already include this thing, we're going to push it onto the array, so we're going to add it to it, and then end. If it does include it, there's no else block, so it doesn't do anything. It's just a no op. After that, we end our do block, so we have one end statement for here, another end statement for here, and then finally we have an end statement for this define block. We put new r at the bottom because Ruby has an implicit return, so it's returning to us the last item. So we return this new array after making sure there are no duplicates. And that's how to do it without relying upon the built-in methods array unique or r.unique exclamation point. Then we get to the test. So what is the point of a test? Well, the point of a test, if we run it, let me run it just from the terminal here, ls. This is unique. Okay, so if I run ruby unique.rb, you can see this is what it's supposed to look like. It has all sorts of special formatting, so if you don't run it through the terminal, it can kind of look a little weird. And I'm going to comment out this stuff, just so it's not as cluttered, and then run that again. There it goes. These two little green dots means it ran two tests. They both returned green, so they're okay. So what does a test do for us? Well, to start off, we have to declare a new class called arrayTest. This operator right here means inherits from, and this is all kind of advanced Ruby. At least this part of it is. You don't really need to understand this. This is that osmosis part. You don't really need to understand this in its entirety in order to use it. But just as a quick introduction, there's a module named test. Inside the module named test, there is a module named unit. And inside of the module named unit, there is a class called test case. And we're extending that. We're going to make our own version of it. Inside of the Ruby test framework, anything that begins with test underscore is going to get run right here. So when it says there's 2 tests, that's how it knows there are 2 tests. So first off, we start off with r_1 with bat, balls, gloves, drinks, and balls. So balls is duplicated twice here. Then we have r2, which we call the built-in unique method. We return that into r2, and then we assert equal, which means I am guaranteeing this is true, that whenever we take the results here, it's only going to have bat, balls, gloves, and drinks. And we call .sort because we want to compare both arrays at the same point. So when we call sort on it, what it's going to do is it's going to make sure that both of these items are in the correct order. So what we get back from here is the same as what we get back from there. If that isn't true, then array doesn't match. As we can see, it clearly does. But let's prove that. Let's go ahead and let's say that we're like that. So we're saying now that it didn't change anything. Everything is exactly the same. If we run that test, immediately you can see this red line. You can see that our error message array does not match pops up. You can see it's saying that the error occurred on line 25 right here. You can see the green dot and then the big red F, which tells us that the test failed. And the first thing you do in an assert statement like this is you say what the expected outcome is. And so it says you expected to see balls, balls, bat, drinks, gloves. But what you actually got was balls, bat, drink, and gloves. So it's telling me exactly why this failed. This is the reason why tests are considered extremely important, and you will see lots of them as you continue your programming and Ruby career. Ruby really puts a high emphasis on tests, which is one of the good things about it. And so then it says this is the name of the test that failed. We can Control F that right in there, and we'll see it, or Command F, depending upon your operating system. And we perform the exact same thing, except for this time, instead of using the built-in Ruby method, we use the one that we wrote. And inside of here, we assert that it's going to remove the balls. So we're going to get bat, balls, gloves, and drinks. And if it doesn't, we'll get the error message. We can clearly see that it's working. And if we want to test that, we can fail the test, and then we're going to get our error. So that is the complete rundown of everything that happened inside of this code. And it's, there's not a lot of code here. It's only 37 lines, and yet there is a ton of stuff to learn. And whenever you're new to it, that's how it's going to be. There's just going to be a huge amount of stuff thrown at you. Don't worry about learning each and every single piece of it. Just keep working with it and practicing with it. And again, over time, you're just like doing things like this .each loop. It's just going to become second nature. Defining methods will become second nature. It's all just really about practice and repetition, and then eventually you'll get it. So I'm hoping this video was somewhat helpful to you, and I look forward to our first tutoring session.